Greetings and welcome to the Equity.Guru Investor Roundtable. Little bit different angle today. I'm Rob. That's Galen in the basement. That's Chris in the upper corner of the guru himself. And that is Vishal directly above, the chart attack master. Today we're doing our debrief. It's our post-game analysis of the VRIC, the Vancouver Resource Investor Conference. And I'll go first this time because I usually don't say a whole lot about the investment game, but I was a rookie. It was my virgin trip to the VRIC. These guys have all been there a bunch of times. And I was pretty impressed with the energy, to be quite honest, because earlier descriptions were kind of like, old guys and kind of curmudgeons walking around with their wanting to maybe talk about gold and silver. And it was kind of that mood. Maybe it was coming out of the COVID, coming out of the pandemic and 2 years absence. People were just jacked to get together again. That probably played a part of it. But there was actually quite a bit of youthful energy. There was great diversity, and there was probably between 300 and 400 companies. The other thing, and Chris actually pointed this out during one of his talks, is how much these companies need help. Like how much these companies need Equity.Guru to present their cases, especially as it relates to new investors, women investors, kind of work that angle, work all the different angles in terms of bringing new, fresh blood into this situation. That's really what stood out, because you walk around and you're like, the message is the same. It's the same ding, 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 250 times. So holy smokes, differentiate yourself and utilize the guru or figure out whatever way serves you best to get this thing going. But that really was the need is the thing that really stood out for me.
Yeah, like I think, these guys don't necessarily think about if there's 400 other groups and they all have a card table and a backdrop, how do we stand out amongst those 400? There was maybe 2 companies that I saw where I thought, good job here. Yeah. Sandstorm Royalties had a very simple booth that basically was an explainer of what royalties are and why you might be interested in them. The other one that I really liked was Arania Resources. It's an ARU as a ticker symbol. Never heard of them before, never paid any attention before, but I went over to them. I was like, hey, everybody's got a map on their backdrop. You guys do too, but yours is from the 16th century.
Lost cities.
What the fuck? And the guy was like, well, he starts telling me this story about how he went to the Vatican and was researching the old scrolls to find the lost cities of South America, the cities of gold, and then points to them on the map and says, so I think they were there. And we went out and started throwing drills in the ground, and we found some interesting shit. Like, this is a story. Like, you could put this story on Netflix. This is amazing. I just said, I want to tell your damn story. I don't even care if you pay me. It's like, congratulations on having like dragons on the backdrop and fucking schooners, flying fish, and these insanely hard to read, like old scrolly maps. Like it's just, I sat there and talked to this guy for 20 minutes and then walked straight past the guys next to them and next to them and next to them and next to them. And, the old thinking is you get an attractive woman to stand at the booth and the boys will stop. And that probably still works. But also, actually having a story to tell that's a real story instead of just technical shit. I actually went up to one other company, and the name escapes me, but I will talk about them at a later date. And the young IR dude was sort of left behind while all the others had gone to see Stephen Harper talk. And I went over to him and I pointed at his cores on the table and said, all right, testing you out, what am I looking at? And so he's like, and he starts pointing out, like, here's some pyrite and here's some. I was like, just kidding, man. I don't give a shit. Like, it's no interest to me at all. But you have a story that is different from, like, here are our technicals. And the guy's like, oh, yeah. Actually, the really cool story is how we found this property in the first place. Some dude was noodling around in his barn in northern BC and found what looked like a treasure map of the local area. And took it to the one guy in town who's like a mining guy and said, hey, maybe you've got some interest in this. And they went out on their bloody snow vehicles, found some landmarks in the treasure map, found an outcrop, and started taking samples and realized, oh my God, this is an old mine that everyone had forgotten about.
Yeah.
Like, those are the stories that make you go, okay, like, I'm going to sit here for 20 minutes and talk to you. And they're the ones that younger investors that don't have any sort of interest really in technicals of mining can get behind, right? I'm going to go and get the treasure map guys, and I'll pay attention to that story because it's swashbuckling and it's fun, as opposed to guys next door that are like, well, this is the third company that's owned this property, and the others put $5 million into it, and they drilled 17,000 meters, and we found, look, here's our 43-101. Like, there are guys that will absolutely listen to that and pay attention to that and want that, but they're established, right? You're not making more of those. Every one of the companies that is just focused on that technical guy is feeding from the same dog bowl. And that means you may be the runt of the litter that misses out. If you're all trying to get the same money from the same people with the same story, and over here there's like 98% of the investor market that's not paying any attention at all because they don't give a shit about your technicals. They give a shit about, like, what is palladium? Why do I care? Oh, I've got some in my pocket in my phone. That's interesting. I've got some in my Tesla. That's interesting. Like, this is what needs to happen. And VRIC, this year more than any other year, was starting to get that, right? I've been banging that drum for 6-7 years, telling the mining guys that Minecraft is a thing and that kids are actually into mining as long as it isn't rapaciously destroying indigenous communities. And so, like, you know, what are you doing to make sure that when you're done with the mining, the environment is put back the way it was? What are you doing to take these ores to a thing that makes the world better? What are you doing to get them out of the ground differently, to bring a new approach to something that, you know, an industry that's still using 100-year-old technology? And you're starting to get that lift. The other thing I'll note, a lot of women in the show, and not just like working in the show, not just like dating someone who's really interested in mining, but like coming around their own volition and learning and taking control of their own finances. And man, it gets me right here because we've been talking about this, about the other half of the investing market that nobody talks to for years. And they're finally pushing their way in and making claims and getting involved and being a part of the community, despite the community being so old, white, and bald.
Right. And it also made things a lot more interesting and fun when you're walking around.
Like diversity you mentioned, right? Like diversity is a really important thing. Yeah. A lot more people from other communities than the traditional old rich white guy. And a lot of geologists that are no longer fitting that old stereotype, a lot of company management that are no longer fitting that old stereotype, companies run by all women, companies run by young people that want to do things differently. Like, it's really interesting to see. And a realization, I think, amongst those people that even though the markets are down, we need to get our story out. And that was the thing that really, because I've been to these shows where the markets are down less and people are throwing nooses over the rafters, right? This show, they were like, yeah, the markets are down, but that will lose itself. And eventually we'll need to be telling our story, and we want to be doing it, you know, ahead of time rather than waiting for everybody else to make the move.
Exactly.
So, really interesting turnout, really interesting show. Cambridge House always does it good. Like, to me, the only complaint has ever been the vendors, not the production itself. The production itself is top rate. But, you know, when you go in to see uranium company XYZ doing their presentation, their 10-minute presentation, and they're just going page 0 to page 12 on their PowerPoint in front of like 7 people, you just think, God, man, you're like, you paid money for a hotel, you flew in, you got your backdrop, and you're trying to convince 7 people that they should invest in your company. You might as well put an ad on Craigslist, you know? Yep. Sorry, I ran.
Right. Michelle, you were like a little kid meeting Connor McDavid. That was I remember that standing out.
All right, with Harry Dent, yeah.
Resource.
Yeah, but it's a tradition now. I try to get one of these hyperinflated currencies, get it signed. So last time it was Peter Schiff with my Zimbabwe bill, and this time was Harry Dent with my 1 million Venezuelan bolivars. But I
Was
think you
Harry
hit a
Dent
key
the
word
guy
there,
that
Rob.
was like telling people that it's going to be the biggest crash ever,
Right.
Yeah.
and
He's a
that
pessimist.
investors better be careful? And I was like, be careful. You better be buying tinned meats if what you're saying is true.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But Rob, I think, you hit a key point there when you mentioned energy. I've been going to VRIC. I've been to, Sprott's Natural Symposium, the Metals Investor Forum as well. I think since like 2016. And the energy for this one was probably the best I've ever, sort of seen and felt actually. Could be, as you said, that people are, excited to meet each other in person again. Or it could be because gold is over $1,800 per ounce and, people are excited about where the precious metals are going to go. It's always been sort of like a hassle to get the young people into mining. Previous shows, they brought in like day traders like Timothy Sykes. I think Robert Kiyosaki, I guess this year they're trying to get the young names because a lot of people follow him. But, as Chris mentioned, I did actually see quite a decent amount of young people at this show. And I think it has to do with the fact that people are, into markets now. Obviously, the pandemic was terrible, but maybe a positive thing is people got more involved in finances and looking at ways to secure their financial futures. They got into trading and investing. Started off, yes, with Wall Street bets, but then I think a lot of those people sort of got serious and are now even looking at things like commodities because when they turn on the media or read CNBC, it's always inflation, inflation, inflation. They probably Google what's the inflation hedge. Oh, what's this gold and silver thing? Personally, on my end, I've always been bullish on metals for many years, and a lot of the friends that I have, similar age group, that are, the 9-to-5 jobs, they're all computer engineers, doctors, that kind of stuff. I've been telling them about silver, gold, copper, uranium for a few years. No one really liked commodities, but now I'm getting phone calls saying, hey, you remember that precious metals and that commodity stuff you were talking about years ago and I never paid attention to? Can you sort of tell me about that now? So I'm sort of surprised. I'm actually excited. You can see I was quite excited with my article there. I have a couple of teases of stories that I am writing. And yes, one is also that company that Chris mentioned with the CEO put 20 million of his own money and having access to the Vatican Library. I think there's some good stories to come out from this conference, and there were only a few booths, which actually did stand out because a lot of them were generic. A few of them didn't even have pictures. It was just a, straight up color and the company's name. And I went up to those guys and tried to say, hey, what's the story? What's going on here? And a few of them came back with some good stuff, and a few of them were just like, yeah, there's some holes in the ground. But that's junior mining for you, right? But
by the way, Chris, was that the guy that spoke right before you? Because I think I remember him saying he spent 20 million of his own money.
That was the guy. And like normally I go in there and I feel like Cambridge House uses me as a sea filler, right? They put me in after a couple of guys that have clearly drained the room. And then I get in there and start telling people who the douchebags are, and people walking by stop and sit down. And then I leave, and the next guy is like, so here's my PowerPoint for my company that has a $2 million market cap, and the room just goes. But this guy set the stage for me because he was in there, he's telling jokes, he's educating people onto what they're actually seeing. He's not just like, here's my blah, 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 blah. Here's the Johnson joint. He's like, all right, so here's what this means. And here's what you're looking at here, and here's why it's important. And people were like, okay, interesting.
Right.
And, he's talking about how he wants people to throw money at him. And, he's got stories and anecdotes and humor. And then he was like, all right, I'm done. Peace.
Yep. And he said when he dropped the bomb that he spent all that money of his own.
Dropped all his money in there. He's already had a big win, and he's put 40 million bucks of that back into this thing. So, like, fuck, man, if you're going to do that, I'll throw a couple of $100 at it.
Yep. What popped for you, Galen?
Well, it was interesting in terms of tone. There was a definite sort of juxtaposition of pain and anxiety and anticipation and hope. Basically, the people that were investors were walking around and see, the problem is that when we think about market normalization, the idea is that everything is going to crapped on across the board. There will be a widespread effect as these stocks hit the rates that they should have actually been at in the first place. But more typically, it will be the meme stocks, NFTs, Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, all these inflated entities. They're going to take the crap kicking. The remaining stuff, the stuff that's the standby, the stuff that involved in the boring things like manufacturing and services and commodities, will, yes, take a hit, but considerably less than their counterparts. So I think what has happened now is that the guys that got led by the nose down the lane by Wall Street bets to buy into the AMC and GameStop and were the bag holders by the end of it, and those guys that figure that the NFTs are the saving grace of investments are beginning to realize they've been had. And sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally, people had the best of intentions, but it still just didn't work out because there was no proposition there to begin with. We all just got too much money, too little experience, and too much hope in a time where a pandemic was causing everyone to feel like the world was coming to an end. So what am I going to do? Well, I got to find something. So I think right now that these investors are beginning to realize that there's more of a strategy to this than just finding out what Elon Musk is talking about. There's more of an idea of fundamentals. There's more of an idea of just what the performance actually is. And this is the tone that I was beginning to get from these people. And so, yes, a whole different crowd was beginning to wander around at this conference looking for ways in to understand what is going on. And the big problem for mining has been its esoteric nature because it's based largely on geology, which is a hard subject for everybody, including me. So when these guys start talking about, footwalls and breccia and other terminology, I check out a little bit because it's beyond me, and it's basically a conversation for two geologists. So what they need to do is communicate their story to the people that don't understand, and up until this point have thought that anything that involves mining or energy and resources is bad. It's not true. It's got a lot of challenges, and it may have had not a really great track record. Imperial Mines there is an example in terms of environmental processes, but it's improving. So, and the ESG world, despite what Elon Musk wants to tell people, is actually better for investment and better for these companies that adopt these practices. So they're starting to understand what it likes to take a mine from development to reclamation. Right? They're not just walking away from these projects. There's an idea towards community, which is about freaking time because you don't just grow it out of a vacuum. It grows because of the establishment that's already there, the infrastructure, and the community that surrounds it. So they're starting to pay attention to this. So there's a reason to get involved in these now, not to mention the fact that everything that you're using right now has minerals in it. Your smartphone, your computer, your EV that you're having, please say that you're going to buy something different than a Tesla. So there's all sorts of things that utilize these products, and it's very important. They won't be fading anytime soon, if ever. So if you want to see long-term growth, which is really what these investors need to start realizing, is that that's what you're looking for. You're not necessarily wanting to gain your gains in a week and then run off, thinking they're a millionaire, because most often than not, in a casino, that's where you lose your money. Right? Blackjack is one of the worst tables to play at. It's one of the best tables for growth, but you're going to pretty well, if you play long enough, lose everything you have. So look at the long term. Companies like what we were talking about with that have these gold resources and such, Rockhaven, Brixton Metals, these are long-term plays. These are things that you want to look into, Brixton especially. They're going to grow themselves into a producer here in the province of British Columbia, which is quite the feat in considering all the stuff that's gone on in the recent years. So if you're wanting to see growth that's going to help you when you retire and not something that you can brag to your friends about in a week and a half, these are the types of things to get into. And, that's what I saw. It was these guys coming in, taking a look, and wanting to find out what's happening.
It's interesting to me. One thing that I think about is instead of these companies, because we just talked about them needing help telling their story, and that's what the Guru is all about, but why they don't take a competitive mindset. So in other words, it's not just, okay, here we are, This is our thing. We need investment. Well, why not? I want to kick the other 250 companies' ass and get the investment that they're also trying to get. And I don't know how that maybe changes the presentation at all, but it's like the us against them. Does it seem like they have that mentality?
I don't think so, and I don't think
I don't think they do.
I don't think it necessarily profits them to do so.
Well,
I think
unless
the
they
only
look at
competitor that you can do in that kind of a situation is yourself.
Right.
To change it into a game where you're competing against other companies, it changes the focus, and I wouldn't want to be involved in that kind of environment.
But by getting help when others don't get it, you've put yourself in you've given yourself a competitive advantage.
Not necessarily. The work needs to be the work. I think if you're focused too much on what the other guy's getting, you're not focusing on the work.
Yeah. All right.
That's my viewpoint. You can disagree
All
with
right.
me if you want.
It was cool, and you're going to be hearing today on the site. You'll see support material from the conference, and in the coming days you will see more, because there are companies getting involved with the Guru that we're at VRIC, and there will be more resource information going on. Gents, super duper. Hey, thanks for taking me along. It was a lot of fun and very, very interesting. For Galen and Chris and Michelle.
Go to an investor conference, people. Understand the things that we're talking about by going, so as you can meet us and buy us drinks.
That's a good point too.
Well, I was going to say, Galen, how was
nice.
the booth? Did we get a lot of people come to the booth? A lot of the retail crowd?
There was a lot of people.
It's for me, it was a lot of retail investors, although we did have companies come by, and I discussed stuff with them in regards to our approach to it, and many of them were very excited about that, because that's the way the world is turning.
Yep. You're going to
Even though we were in the media ghetto.
Yes.
You're going to see them, and you're going to see us on the next Equity Guru Investor Roundtable. Cheers.